Switzerland is to host a peace summit June 15 and 16 in support of the Ukrainian President Zelensky's peace proposals. The US Vice President Kamala Harris, the French President Macron, and leaders of Germany, Italy, Britain, Canada and Japan are among those who are going to be attending this peace summit in the Swiss mountaintop resort of Buschenstock. Turkey and Hungary, which maintain cordial ties with Russia, will be represented by their foreign ministers. But despite months of intense Ukraine and Swiss lobbying, some others, are not going to be there. Most notably China, a key consumer of Russian oil and also a supplier of goods that help Moscow to maintain its manufacturing base. Moscow, which has not been invited to this conference, has called this gathering futile. Russia has denounced the meeting and they've said that countries had been pushed to choose sides. The Russian President Putin has also set out certain conditions for peace talks with Ukraine. The conditions are very simple. Ukrainian troops must be completely withdrawn from the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics, the Kherson and Zaporizhia regions, and I draw your attention from the entire territory of these regions, within the administrative borders that existed at the time of their entry into Ukraine. As soon as Kiev declares that it is ready for such a decision and begins the actual withdrawal of troops from these regions, as well as officially notifies that they abandon plans to join NATO, an order to cease fire and begin negotiations will immediately follow from our side, literally at the same minute. And DD India's Jessica Taneja is following the story. She joins us live now. Jessica, so which are the countries that are attending the Switzerland summit or the peace summit, and what message does it send out?
Well, more than 92 countries and 8 organizations are attending the summit, is what we're told, Mark, and important delegations are being sent from Hungary, from Turkey as well. The participation, though expected, nearly 200 countries and organizations to be part of it, but that hasn't materialized so far, even though you saw Zelensky go to various multilateral forums and express his concerns about Russia's invasion of Ukraine and how things are panning out in the East as you and I speak. At this point, Russia has occupied nearly 18% of Ukrainian territory with more than hundreds and thousands of troops that have nearly died in this conflict. It's taken a toll on Ukraine. And if you go by the estimates of the World Bank, Mark, at this point, it says that the damage assessment report clearly says that Ukraine would need as much as $486 billion in the next 10 years for reconstruction efforts. Right now, its needs are immense, and hence the support from the countries grows louder. Also important to note that China is not present at this Ukraine Peace Summit. If you recall, during the Shangri-La dialogue, there was also a possible communication where the Ukrainian side and the Chinese side hadn't met. There were plans made for persuasion and also speak to the Chinese side whether they would be able to attend it. But on the other hand, while Russia has rejected this plan as futile, Moscow does agree to go with a plan in case Beijing comes up with one, and that is one of the peace plans that Moscow could agree with. But these are just few developments coming out of Switzerland at this point. We'll see on what the joint statement says, because as we're told, there could be a joint statement at the end of it, and the participants will have, I think, until next Friday to come up with agreement or non-agreement with what the joint statement says. And meanwhile, the participants right now are deliberating how to condemn Russia at the same time, and also include more participants in talking about a possible peace plan. So that could be a challenge. But how much is peace doable? Only time will tell.
Right. So the 92 countries that are present there are looking to try and expand the number of countries who can participate in a further peace plan, and try and get China on board. But what are the reservations that China has for participating in a summit like this?
Well, even previously, if you recall, Mark, you remember what China had said even at the time of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. China had said that it would not support Russia, would not be part of this war, and had said quite often on various multilateral forums as well, that it would not want a conflict that sort of hampers trade, and it would want peace to prevail, and it would not sort of support Ukraine, neither would it support Russia. But different kind of allegations, as we know, have surfaced in the past, even with the West saying that China's continued support to the Russians, especially economically, even militarily, supporting their military defense sector, and also with no export control or the dual-use items. There have been allegations that China has been quietly funding the Russian machinery. But at the same time, China has said that it would not consider this particular peace summit for participation, simply because it says Russia is not invited. So it has to have an equal participation from the country as well. So, net and net, China would say that it has a separate peace plan. So does Brazil, for that fact, to sort of come around for some peaceful resolution to this conflict that is dragging into its third year now, Mark.
Right. There are countries that are probably also participating, but not at a political level, maybe at, at some level of diplomacy. Also, we need to focus also on Prime Minister Modi speaking to Zelensky in Italy. And the Prime Minister did say that dialogue and diplomacy are the only ways ahead. And that's precisely what he had also said to the Russian president, that this is not an era, of course, though he said it some time ago. But the point is that India stands, clearly on the path of dialogue and diplomacy. And that really is the way forward.
That's correct, Mark. And if you've heard from the statements that have been given out from India's foreign ministry as well, it is reiterated that India wants to engage in a way which enhances diplomacy and dialogue, and also if a possible mediation could be considered, India would happily be part of that. Looking at how Indian global stature is emerging, it is a major power, and hence does adopt a role of mediator here and there, and does the finest, bits of diplomacy which do provide certain resolutions and solutions. So in a way, India was looked at as a possible mediator, and its presence, would to an extent also enhance that atmosphere where there could be a possibility of some sort of stability. And India, on the other hand, would also want to ensure that there is peace and stability, and it could emerge as one of those key players that helped reach that goal. Well, yes, you pointed out that Prime Minister Narendra Modi met Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky yesterday at the G7. That was a crucial meeting, again, reiterating support for Ukraine, but also at the same time saying that diplomacy and dialogue is the way forward. Confrontation would not help at this point. Given the fact that this war has dragged on, look at Ukraine's energy needs at this point. The country is fighting hard, even though the United States and other countries did pull up a plan to fund Ukraine through the interest gains from the profits of frozen Russian assets. That $60 billion loan, topped with some European countries also putting in money in there, in the kitty. So for Ukraine, at this point, apart from monetary support and military support they're getting, they also need other countries and perhaps their intervention at this point, whatever it can get. And with India, hopes are always high.
Right. Final question, Jessica, also that we heard the Russian president, his conditions are rather difficult, one would say maximalist at this point of time. And so is the Ukrainian peace plan, wanting, everything to move back to square one. So the negotiating positions are pretty much as they were on day one. Ukraine has been given support now for another 10 years. It doesn't seem, of course, there's no military victory. Pundits say that there's going to be no military solution to this conflict. Where can dialogue step in to see, some sort of compromise on either side?
Well, Mark, Russia currently occupies 18% of the Ukrainian territory, as I pointed out, and that is the point to stress on. While the forces are engaged in a battle of sorts in the east right now, in the Donetsk and Luhansk region, it still continues. Ukraine does need that kind of military support. But what Russia does say is that it will agree for a ceasefire if Ukraine doesn't opt for a NATO partnership, and that has been the demand since day one. It would agree, Russia says, on peace talks. But at the same time, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, if you recall, had come up with a 10-point peace plan in 2022, the year that Russia invaded Ukraine. And that hasn't seen much, a movement.
Okay.
But at this point, for Ukraine, it will be important to see on what kind of military support it's getting, all the aid, because it needs it very quickly.
Yes, Jessica.
The Russian forces are advancing at this point. So the point remains, the ceasefire could only come into place and the Russian side will only come to talk only when Ukraine agrees that it doesn't opt for a NATO membership mark.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Jessica Taneja, for putting that into context for us.